So I'm just gonna go over a lot of general stuff and some terminology and shit like that for Dead by Daylight. Um, just some stuff to help you get started in the game. So, first of all, one of the most important buildings in the entire game is this one, the Killer Shack. This spawns on almost every single map, and it has one of the strongest palettes in the game. This is what's considered a god palette for a very specific reason. If I were to drop this palette at any time, the killer would either have to kick it. He would either have to kick the pallet, or he'd have to take an extremely long loop that would end up hurting him in the long end. So generally, the way you want to loop God Palette is the way I'm doing right now. Of course, there's a hook in the way right now, so that makes it a little bit more uncomfortable. But whenever you're looping, you want to make sure that you're hugging the wall. You also want to make sure that you're trying to look behind you whenever you can. You don't have to constantly look behind you, and that's a big mistake that survivors make a lot of the time. They'll sometimes just look behind them and end up running into walls a lot. So just every once in a while, especially when you're turning corners, just take a quick glance around the corner and make sure that this killer is following you. Now, every killer has what's called a red stain. That's a little red light that they get in front of them. That red light is how the best survivors learn to outplay certain killers. When you see that red light when you see that red light, that means that the killer is facing in that direction, meaning that odds are they'll be walking in that direction as well. So whenever you're running into the killer shack, say the killer's chasing me from more or less where that hook is, I'd be running in here and looking for where the killer is. Depending on where he is, I gotta make a decision. I gotta decide, can I make it all the way through this area, through the pallet, back around all the way to the window? Or do I not have enough time for that? Do I have to take the window right away? If I have to take the window right away, then that's perfectly fine. But that does mean that I'm using up, assuming I'm in chase, of course, that does mean I'm using up one of my 3 vaults that I get during a chase per minute. So generally, you'll see a lot of better survivors greed pallets and windows a lot. They'll even end up getting hit through them when they could have easily dropped them just because they want to try and preserve the pallets for as long as possible. Now, this isn't really necessary, but at the same time, playing safe with a coordinated team is definitely a really good strategy. It'll make it so that the killer has to take a long time to get any downs at all while your team is going to be doing generators. But this is generally the route you want to be taking when you're looping the killer shack, especially as a beginner. You want to make sure you're looking behind you as well. What direction is the killer facing? When I run in here, does it look like he's gonna if it looks like he's gonna try and turn this corner, I can just run in here, pretend to fake the window, and then just keep going. You don't have to commit to every vault or every window until the very last moment. An important thing to know about running vaults, otherwise known as fast vaults in the community, is you can do them at the very last moment. You don't have to be spamming your button before you actually end up going through whatever you want to do. You can go for the very last split second. Now, when you have an item, this is extremely important to try and commit to the vault or the pallet as late as possible, because if you commit earlier on, the moment you see this animation start right there, no, sorry, the moment you see the button go away at the very bottom of the prompt, it'll take away whatever item you're holding. So if a killer is good and paying attention, then they'll end up realizing, hey, they committed really early to this window vault, and they can make a decision on whether or not to swing or just keep going based on that. But looping is 100% an interaction between both survivors. It isn't, or both the survivor and the killer. It isn't something that you just do the same way every single time, especially not against smarter killers, because killers will start to see patterns and they'll start to counterplay them. So sometimes you might just want to come in through the window. If the killer's chasing me, I might just loop around the window this one time, try and go back into the killer shack, and then if the killer just keeps committing to that other side, you might want to loop around the other side. Back to here, you just want to try and keep as much distance between you and the killer as possible while still staying at the loop. Now you might notice here these cracks are very easy to see through. So if you're at any point, if you end up on this side of the pallet or this side of the shack, this isn't a bad side of the shack to be on at all. You can look through the windows. Of course, I do have the highlights out for the pallets with windows opportunities, but that's beside the point. You can look through these slots to see which way the killer is going. If you can see the killer, they can't mind game you because you can see exactly where they're going, especially on a long loop like this. This is what's considered a really long loop. Now, generally, whenever you're looping, you wanna, like I said, greeting pallets is generally a good thing in a solo queue environment because you don't know what your teammates are doing. They could be going through and just gen rushing the absolute shit out of as a killer, or they could be just easily they could easily be crouching around the map just scared because they don't know where the killer is. So generally, I try and wait till the very last moment. But if you know that you're not gonna make it, for example, if the killer's chasing me, and I know that for sure this window's blocked off, so I can't make the window, or I can't make it all the way through another loop, that's when I'll usually drop the pallet. Now, of course, with a pallet this strong, you don't necessarily want to drop it right away. It might be worth just taking a hit for it instead, and then taking the hit and going to a different loop altogether. That's what Windows of Opportunities is really nice. Is a really nice situation for because it gives you the opportunity to see where other loops are. Right now, from this wall, I can see that there's a pallet all the way over there, which means that there's probably some sort of loop over there that I can take. But anyways, going back to the Killer Shack pallet, you don't necessarily have to leave once the pallet is down either. If the killer doesn't break the pallet, you stay at, if it's especially if it's a strong loop like this one, you want to be staying at this loop for as long as possible. This is why this is called the God pallet. If you break this pallet and the killer is inside and doesn't want to break the pallet, you're completely safe out here until you see him come all the way around either that right side or that left side. Which again, you have the window over there, and you have the holes in the wall over there to let you see where the killer is coming from. If the killer just doesn't want to break the pallet, you can just come right back inside, and same thing happens. If he doesn't break this pallet, he doesn't get a hit on you, period. It's impossible to mind game a survivor at the Killer Shack because at the end of the day, this is just an area that's extremely safe for survivors because there's no way that the killer can get to you unless the pallet is already broken. So if you notice the killer is not breaking a lot of pallets, you might want to risk it. You might want to drop the pallet early and start looping it. And for a pallet like this, for example, since the loop is a little bit smaller on the sides, the distance between one side of the pallet and the other is smaller. That means that a killer can try and mind game this, especially on this side right here where it has this tall wall. If you can't see the killer, then that's when they can mind game you. That's what the killer wants when they come to the loop. They don't want you to see them. They want you to think that they're going one direction, then they can fake the other one. They want you to think that you're faking one direction, then they can go back in the other one. Or they go back in the original one. So, a really important tactic that better survivors tend to use is looping a lot of loops together. So you see that I have the Killer Shack right here. After this is what's called a filler pallet. This is just a pallet that doesn't really belong to any specific loop, such as this one. This is what's called a pallet gym over here. This structure with this little box right here, this wall over here, and the pallet between these two walls is called a pallet gym. Now this is a decently safe loop that you can run. You can run in very similar way to the Killer Shack. Something you can always do is when you're looping around this side, if you see that you have a little bit of distance on the killer, you can try and go for a sneaky play and just loop back around this side. Now if the killer doesn't see you go around this side, they might just keep on looping this pallet the same way you were originally, when you can just come over here and run away, whether that's to find another loop or to just hide. That really is up to you. Now, as I was saying about the looping the pallets together, now we see that we have a jungle gym over here, a filler pallet, and a pallet gym. Or sorry, a Killer Shack, a filler pallet, and a pallet gym over there. So what I could do, for example, is if I was getting chased from, let's say, that same hook from before, that hook all the way out there in the distance, if the killer's over there right now and I'm getting chased, I might run over here, do my loops around the Killer Shack. Eventually he makes me drop it. Whenever I drop it, after of course trying to use the window as much as possible, at a loop like the Killer Shack or a Jungle Gym, which I'll show you later on, you want to make sure that you use the window as many times as possible before it gets blocked off. If you're in a chase, you have 3 times within 1 minute to use it. Then if the entity blocks it off, you can just go to the pallet and keep going if you need to. So, as I was saying, if he makes me drop the pallet right here, I can drop the pallet. If he starts breaking it, immediately I can come over to this next filler pallet. Now, of course, with that windows of opportunity, you wouldn't know where the killer is at all. But with these filler pallets, what you want to be doing is not necessarily looping them a long time like you might a killer shack or a jungle gym. Generally, if I'm getting chased by the killer towards a filler pallet, what I'll do is I'll maybe go 1 or 2 loops and try and get a stun on them. If I can get a stun on the killer, easily I can make it to the next pallet. I have no fear whatsoever. If I don't get the stun, that's when you have to decide what to do. Some killers might just respect the pallet and then stand still and look at you, see what direction you're going, and try and cut you off. That's why you have to be paying attention whenever you drop a pallet or whenever you're at a loop in general. You need to make sure you have eyes on the killer so you can make your best informed decision off of that. So for example, if I were to drop this pallet and I see the killer stand still, I might fake running away, see what he does, and then maybe come back to the pallet, commit to it. Now, although this longer side is generally better to run, you do got to keep in mind that if you can't see the killer, that's bad for you because then he could sneak up on you on a direction you weren't expecting. So instead of committing straight to the pallet when you run back over here, you might want to go for the longer loop all the way around. You can go back into the pallet. Loops are just really versatile overall. That's why survivors are so strong when it comes to these areas, because if they have an opportunity to use a loop and you give them that opportunity, you don't make it so that they have to leave, then they'll just have the easiest time of their life just running around in circles trying to keep you at this pallet. So anyways, going back over to our example, I dropped the killer shack pallet, right? Let's say he kicked it and I came over to this filler pallet and started running him around and I stunned him. Okay, great. I got the stun. Something you want to keep in mind whenever you do get a stun on a killer is you want to see if they have enduring. How fast do they recover from a stun? Do they get back up right away, or do they stay in their stun animation for a little bit? If they stay stunned in the animation for a little bit, that means they don't have enduring, so you can make sure that every time you stun them, you can get as much distance as possible. If they do have enduring, however, you gotta keep in mind that they get back up really quickly and they could just come back around the pallet, take the short side over here, and keep the chase going right away. So that's something you gotta pay attention for. But let's say I got the stun, I saw that he didn't have enduring, so great, I have a bunch of time right now to keep running away. I'm gonna run from this pallet all the way over to this filler pallet. This is what's called what's called like just looping loops together. I know it sounds kind of weird, but chaining these loops together is really effective. Maybe I go from that pallet gym all the way over to what's called a 4 lane over here, because well, of course, you have 1, 2, 3, and then 4 lanes back here. It does depend on where this window spawns, because on this other side right now you see there's no window, but it can spawn on this back wall, so that would make this a 4th lane. But yeah, so maybe I stunned him at that pallet. He didn't have enduring. That's great for me. I loop him over here for a little bit. And a lot of killers, especially when they're newer to the game, they tend to swing through pallets a lot or respect them, one or the other. So what you can do, if you see that a killer respects a pallet or maybe swings at a pallet too early, you can just loop that into another tile altogether. Right, so I went from that pallet gym all the way over through this pallet. You want to make sure you're running through pallets as much as possible, because that's what scares the killer. And then you go into the fastball in the window. Now it is possible to get a fastball in this window from this angle. It's just very difficult, especially on console with their lower sensitivity. But yeah, you just want to be chaining these things together, because the more you chain them together, the more time you're wasting for the killer. At the end of the day, that's what survivors want out of chases. They want to waste the killer's time as much as possible. So let's say he makes us drop this pallet, right? Now you got to make a decision. Is this a strong or a safe pallet? That really does depend on the situation. This right now is a very unsafe pallet for me. If I were to just camp the inside of this pallet here, the killer could easily just hide his red stain by facing the other direction and then moonwalking backwards over here, and I would have no idea when he's approaching from this angle. This is a very short wall. You want to make sure you're taking the long walls as much as possible. So in a situation like this pallet on a 4 lane, these are generally really unsafe pallets for survivors. So what you see better survivors tend to do is they'll drop the pallet and they'll just keep going over to the window, wherever the window may be. If it's on this side, great, you have an easy vault right there. If it's on this back wall, you can loop back around and then jump back in through the window. It really does depend on how the tile is formed, because it is RNG at the end of the day, how they form, and it all does come down to decision making. So maybe, let's say the killer did get a smack on me at some point over here, right? Because I decided to camp this pallet and it was a bad decision. Whenever you get a smack, you don't need to panic, but you do need to make sure that you get as much distance as possible. I don't usually like vaulting or dropping a pallet after I get smacked because I waste a lot of the speed burst that it gives me. Now, generally, you might hear me say, hey, this person wasted a pallet or whatever, but a waste of a pallet is only really a waste if you get smacked as you're dropping it. So you want to make sure that either you're going to get hit or you're going to drop the pallet and stun them. You don't want to get hit as you're dropping the pallet, because that just ends up hindering you, because you not only gave up a good resource for your team, you also got hit in the process, making it so that the killer has more pressure on you. But anyway, he smacked me at the pallet over by the 4-lane over there. This pallet gym is already gone. So what's next? I'm gonna run somewhere else. Now we do have a pallet gym over there, but since I've already kind of explained how to use them, let's talk really quickly about Z-walls over here. This is probably the weakest structure in all of Dead by Daylight. These are really common tiles, and they're just very short loops, and honestly the only way to actually beat a killer out on them is to just win a mind game. It's 50-50 whether you go one way or the other, and what you can do, for example, is you can try and go for a fake vault if the killer rather commits to one direction early. You can try and fake and then just keep going. Like I said, you don't. Oh, there's a hatch. Like I said, you don't have to commit to the action really early. You can wait till the last possible second till you see the killer. But anyways, as I said, we've already talked about that palette, so let's talk about this filler palette. Now, you might have to get annoyed a little. Actually, I'll try and go somewhere else away from the hatch so it isn't as annoying. So let's talk about this filler palette. Filler palettes are just palettes that aren't at tiles, like I said before. This is just a random tile that can spawn for on any of the any of the Curtis Pren maps. And generally what you want to do is you want to find whichever side is longer and run that as tightly as possible. Make sure that you keep an eye on the killer though, especially shorter killers such as Freddy or the Legion can hide behind the pallet and then double back without you knowing where they are. Now when it comes to dropping pallets, there is a really interesting strategy you can use. Whenever you go through the pallet, you don't have to spam your button right away to drop it as quickly as possible. What you can do is a bit of a vacuum. So you run through the pallet a little bit. Nope, I messed it up a little bit there. What you can do is you can run through the pallet and then kind of teleport backwards a little bit. As you saw there, I just kind of slid backwards. And when you run through that pallet, killers might think, hey, they're just going to keep on running. I'm just going to keep on walking through the pallet. With that vacuum where it pulls you back, that gives you an opportunity to use, to get a stun on them. Man, I really hope there's a jungle gym on this map, because that'd be really nice. That right there was another pallet gym, of course. Here's another filler pallet. And here we have a 4-lane. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we got a jungle gym on this area, or on this map at all. So I will be going into a different map to explain that later. But as I said, you want to be chaining these loops together. Go from pallet to pallet, window to window. Maybe you want to go through this window into this pallet, or through this area into this pallet. You can loop back around all the way to the window. You don't have to take the same route over and over again. You want to mix it up, because that's what makes the killer have to be on their toes, making sure they're thinking about what you might be doing. They have to expect your every move. Now, let's really quickly talk about these central structures. This is usually what I usually just call these whatever the name of the map is. So on Ransade Abattoir, the middle building, I just call it Abattoir. On Crotus Pren Asylum, I usually just call this the Asylum. On Father Campbell's Chapel, I call the middle building the Chapel. That's just a really easy way to recognize them. Now, most of these central structures have really strong loops. This is probably one of the biggest, or one of the strongest areas in the entire game right here inside of this building. Because as you can see, you have one pallet, two pallet, three pallets, four pallets, and all of these pallets are generally extremely safe. So let's say, for example, I drop this pallet against the killer. They have no option other than to kick this pallet if they want to hit me. If they're on that side where my scratch marks were left, and they try and loop back around past the broken windows, I can just come back over here really safely. If they try and come back, I can just jump back down over and over again. And since this is such a long loop, if the killer decides to break it, I can choose either direction to go, and I'll be fine. Not only that, you have pretty strong windows too. If you go through this window, the killer has to follow you. If they try and take this long area to cut you off, it just makes the loop so long. Whereas as a survivor, you could go from this pallet straight to this window, and no, I didn't take the fastball there. You got to make sure you hit the right angle. Try and hit them as perpendicular as possible. But as I said, you can just keep going from the area to window to window to pallet to window to pallet to pallet. It really does. This game really does lend itself a lot to chain loops together. Now, like I've said, God pallets are pallets that killers either have to kick or have to leave you. They're not pallets that you want to be trying to mind game. Now, this is actually a pretty good killer-sided pallet for this map. Right here, if I were to drop this pallet, the killer could come back around this wall and try and go for a mind game. He comes around this wall and I have to take a 50-50. Is he going to commit to going all the way through? If I think he is, then I might want to vault over here. But if he doesn't commit to vaulting, if he just turns that corner and then doubles back, that's an easy hit onto me. So this is one of the better spawns for killers. This pallet right here specifically. Let's walk over to this one. This pallet, look at how long this loop is. If I drop this pallet right now, what's the killer gonna do? The killer has no option. They can come all the way around this long way, come through this middle room, back this way, but I'll see them before they get within range of me, because what survivors can do is they can peek around corners with a third person. Right here, I'm perfectly safe. I can see the killer from really far away. If I see him turn that corner, even if he isn't showing me his red light, I can just go straight back over the vault easily, just like that. That's essentially what God pallets are. They really they're pallets that have to be broken because of how big the loop is. Alright, I think we'll be going over to another map now, though. Alright, so we're going to be loading up on the Blood Lodge next here. Now, hopefully this time the game decided to bless me and spawn a jungle gym. Oh, immediately we find one. Alright, but before we get into that, let's talk about all this debris in the middle of the map. Shut up, Hatch. So, this is a really strong map for survivors as well, simply because of the sheer amount of filler pallets there are. As I'm running through here, you can see how many pallets light up just in this middle area. Not only that, these pallets are basically unmind gameable for most killers because, well, these are really short walls. You can't really try and outplay them as a killer by maybe faking around a corner unless you're Freddy or Legion or Pig, and you can hide down behind or you can like crouch behind the pallet maybe, or just hide behind the pallet really quickly and try and double back. But anyways, the way you want to be running these pallets usually is, like I said, you want to be just picking a side and taking that way. If you see that the killer's catching up, you might want to swap it up. Maybe take this side instead. Maybe loop back around this side over and over again. Like I've said before, you want to make yourself unpredictable. You don't want to give the killer an easy down. You don't really want to make it so that he can discover patterns in your play, because all that ever does is harm you. So, for example, we'll go back into a situation where you can chain pallets together. So right here, let's say the killer chases me from that direction over by that fire barrel. I start. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Now you start running in this direction, right? The killer's chasing me, and I'm making sure to keep an eye out for him. Now, generally, what I like to do, see like that, I ran into this tire. You have to make sure you're paying attention to where you're going because otherwise you're gonna get yourself hit for no reason. Generally, what I like to do is I like to turn my camera like maybe a split second before I turn the corner because that way I know what direction they're going and I can try and make my adjustment in time. Let's say he forces this pallet out of me, right? Whenever this pallet's down, he can either commit to breaking it or he can try and mind game it. If he tries to mind game it, then this just becomes an extremely long loop right away. So over and over again, I can just run this in circles. If he doubles back, then I double back too. You want to be mirroring the killer's movements essentially, and if he ever gets too close to you, like say he's right up my ass right now, I can try and go for the vault. If he smacks me, okay, whatever, I go to the next pallet. If he doesn't smack me, then I can keep looping this pallet until he breaks it. But anyways, let's say he does finally break this pallet. What I can do is I can just go straight into a different loop right away. I run over here. If the killer's chasing me, I can do the exact same thing. And if anything, I can come over to this structure. This is a tractor structure. These are really strong for survivors too. They're pretty safe. This window provides really nice safety for you. And if you look at the right angle, you can actually see where the killer's going under the tractor a little bit. You can tell what direction they're going, so you can try and make an adjustment. So let's say we ran over from that pile like I just did. You come through the window and you take the vault right away because you know that you have time for it. You can run over here, tilt your camera a little bit. If you see that the killer it keeps committing through that pallet and running around this way, you can just keep running around it yourself. You don't have to go back to the window. You have time to go to the pallet and run back around. Maybe this time you go to the window and the killer might be expecting you to take the vault right away. If he's not close enough, what you can do is you can run up here and just not vault. And then wait see through the window what direction is he gonna go. Maybe you see that he doubles back and tries to come back up here. Of course, you wouldn't get a running vault there, but you could just sit at the window and get a fast vault, or a medium vault rather, right away. So generally, with these loops, you just want to be trying to figure out a way to combine them together. Here we have another example of an amazing 4-lane into a pallet gym here. This is perfect for what you might want to do. Like you saw there, that's a nice long lane that you can run down as a survivor. If the killer's chasing you, hey, that's fine. You can run to a pallet. If he hits you, you go to the next one. You don't want to stay at the same loop if he hits you. Very few situations where you actually want to end up doing that. So maybe the killer followed you through the vault on that one. You can just run right over here as well. It's exactly what you want to be thinking about. You want to be just trying to chain as many different pallets and windows together as possible. You don't want to be sticking to one area too much, because what that ends up doing is wasting all the pallets in one area. So for example, let's say he made me kick this pallet and I had just committed to this pallet. I said, fuck it, I want this pallet to go down before anything else. Now these two areas create what's called a dead zone between this loop over here, which right now doesn't have a generator, but it could very well spawn a generator right here pressed up against this wall. And then from all the way from that generator to the middle of the map over there where that hook is, it'd be a complete dead zone. There's no pallets, no windows for you to run through. Now let's really quickly talk about the main blood lodge over here. Now you might see this top part and think, oh, this is a nice place to loop, because it's a long drop, but no, generally you don't actually want to be taking loops with long drops because killers don't actually suffer from the stagger that survivors do. You'll notice that when I land, I can't run for a little bit. This is me holding forward the entire time whenever I land. That's just how long it takes to keep running. So generally what you want to do at this structure, for example, is you might want to go through the window, right? You look back while you're vaulting, see what direction is the killer running. Is he running over through past that door? You just go straight back to the window. You don't even have to go back to the window. You can run over to this filler pallet. You kept up before. Remember, you kept it up because you went to the tractor. Now you want to make sure you run through it a couple times. The killer might be closer to you. He might be getting bloodlust on you. That's when you want to start committing to pallets. Whenever you think the killer is going to get bloodlust, because that way you can either clear their bloodlust by making them break a pallet, and of course, bloodlust is when killers are just a tiny bit fat. They start gaining a little bit of speed over time. The longer the chase goes, the faster they end up getting. And unless they're hitting people, committing certain actions such as throwing a hatchet or dashing as a pig, or if they break pallets, that also breaks their bloodlust. It doesn't break it if they vault through a window though, so you got to keep that in mind. So, I'd like to talk about this tractor really quickly because, well, it's another very strong building. Like I said, you can kind of look under the tractor, see what direction it's going. So let's say I've been running this loop clockwise. I see the killer turn around. If I can see him through here, I can easily just turn around and keep running it counterclockwise instead of this time. Now, something about this loop, and I'll show it on the way back. I run pretty close to that ramp leading up to the window over there, so you might want to look at the scratch marks. You see, it starts kind of leading up the ramp a little bit. It was kind of hard to see because they were fading already. But the scratch marks they end up looking like somebody might have ran up the ramp. You might even want to take a couple steps on the ramp like I did right there. A fall from this height isn't actually going to stagger you at all. You can literally just do this if you want to and keep going. And if the killer doesn't see you directly, that might confuse them. They might go up to the window, which would end up slowing them down. But of course, whenever they get close enough to you, that's when you do want to commit to the window. You want to make sure that you take as much time as possible before getting hit. Whether that means committing a lot of windows, a lot of pallets, it's generally the best idea. But of course, you don't want to run around throwing pallets left and right because that just ends up harming your team because the killer can break them really quickly. Once he finishes the chase with you, whether that's him giving up on you or downing you. So let's talk about this really quickly. There's two directions you can run this loop. You can run it to the left or to the right. Now, I'll just give a couple seconds so you can try and figure out what you might want to do, and then I'll tell you what I'll do. Alright, now I'm going to run this in this direction, because this is the longer direction for the loop. This is how you want to be running loops in general. Now, if the killer's getting close to you, you can double back around the short side of a pallet to just get that little bit more time, so that you can drop the pallet on the killer. Maybe trying to get a stun, maybe just trying to make some distance. But you want to be taking the long side of the loop, and when you've dropped a pallet, all that does is make the loop longer. So now instead of just having this one side to run it around, I can run around the entire thing as opposed to just the left or the right. Until the killer breaks the pallet, you want to be committing to it. Now, of course, this is a bit of a shorter loop, all things considered. A killer can stay on this side, fake one direction, fake the other, and then commit to one direction if he wants to. And that generally ends up working against survivors. But again, like I said, killers don't want to waste their time, but that's exactly what survivors want out of killers. So let's finally come talk about this jungle gym. Now, this is what's called a jungle gym. Whenever there's a pallet either here or right here where I'm standing, and there's a window either here or in that hole. Now you'll notice that jungle gyms always spawn the window and the pallet on opposite ends of the structure from each other. So if that pallet is there, this window will always be here. If the pallet is here instead, the window will always be at this wall. Now, this is actually the worst variation of the two. This is what's called a short gym pallet, or a short wall jungle gym. Man, I don't know where short gym pallet came from. But what that means is, on this wall, the killer has an easier time mind gaming if you want to try and commit to the window. If the killer's right behind you and you try and commit to this window, he can just go around and get a smack on you really quickly over here. Now, if you see that he's committing to going around alongside right away while you're getting chased, you can just fake the window and then go back to the pallet and run it back around. On the other hand, if you have the pallet on this side and the window over there, what you can do is you can run over here, and this will be one long flush wall. So whenever you vault through this window, you've got a perfectly safe area over here. Actually, I'm just gonna check really quickly, see if... Nope, that looks like a 4-lane. If I could find an example of it, that would be amazing, but I don't think we have one. There might be one on the other side of the killer shack here, however. Now, all these tiles, jungle gyms, pallet gyms, 4 lanes... Actually, this is a long wall jungle gym. I can show you exactly what I mean. All of these structures always spawn in the same spot. The only thing that changes is their orientation and what kind of structure it is. Now, let's go for an example of how you might want to be running this. Generally, the way you want to run these long wall jungle gyms is you want to loop through the pallet, come to the window, and then when you come through the window, you want to make sure you look backwards and you check what side is the killer committing to. And you might want to just hop around the corner for a moment, make sure that they're not just faking one side to then commit back to the other one. And then you just want to run away from them. Now this is a great spawn right here, because what I could do if I really wanted to, I could run through this pallet, go to the window, and then fake running to the right. The killer might commit to coming this side. If he does, then I get a free vault onto the killer shack window. And just like that, I have an extremely long loop. I fake running left, and then I can double back to the right. If I really want to, hey, look, there's a filler pallet over here. Then from the filler pallet, if I need to drop it, I can drop it. If not, then I can just come straight back to the long wall jungle gym, and then back through the window, over to the pallet yet again. Now you can of course go for some tricky movement as well with these structures. Now let's say a killer is chasing me from more or less from this hook at the killer shack. I can run through over here, and most survivors will take this route that I'm about to do. Most survivors will just run through the pallet, come to the window, keep looping it. So what you can do is you can run through the loop, through the pallet, and then just duck behind this corner and just walk around a little bit. Just move over. Of course I have fixated, so I walk really quickly. But yeah, you can literally just throw in a wrench in the killer's plans. You don't want to be predictable. If the killer's really close to you, won't make the window, fuck it. Take this left wall, loop it around one time so you can maybe get a stun on the killer. If the killer hits you before you can get the pallet down, then use the speed boost, get somewhere else. Go to this filler pallet, go to the killer shack, go to that 4-lane over there. This is what you want out of this is what you want to be getting out of your loops. You want to be getting as much time and distance as possible. If a killer's breaking a pallet, that's your time to run as far as you can, and you don't have to run straight to another loop. So let's say, for example, I end up dropping this pallet. If I see the killer's breaking it, I have all the time in the world practically. I can run from here over to that jungle gym if I want to. I could run past this all the way over here if I really wanted to get greedy about it and try and make it all the way to this 4-lane. Now this area does generally spawn a filler pallet if there isn't a jungle gym over there. So right now this is a pretty unsafe area, so what we'd call a dead zone over here. It's just a big area with nothing done. Of course, as these pallets get thrown, the dead zone starts becoming greater and greater. But generally what you can do is just chain the loops together. That's exactly what you want to be doing. You want to be finding whatever side you think is longest of the loop, hugging the wall as much as you can, and then dropping the pallet, trying to get a stun on the killer. If you don't get a stun, then that's fine. Make them break the pallet. Make them commit to breaking the pallet, or they can get a hit on you and just go somewhere else. I know I've generally repeated a lot of the same stuff, but that's just how looping is. Looping is basically a modular plan that you can choose when to do stuff with. As looping, you have a few general strategies. You have drop the pallet, you have loop the pallet, you have go through the window, fake the window, you have small stuff like that. And it ends up hurting the killer if you can chain all these together. And these, as I said, they're modular, so you can just fit all these pieces together in however you feel fit. Some killers are going to be really strong at loops. They're going to know exactly when to try and go for a mind game. They're going to know when you're going to be committing to one direction or another. And hey, that sucks. If you get a killer that's really strong, maybe you want to be dropping pallets early against him, because that way it'll make the loops longer. Let's really quickly talk about these TL walls. There's a right and a wrong way to run these 100%. Now what you're seeing right now is what's considered the right way to run them just in a void. But killers will usually try and run through this middle area as opposed to taking the outside of these loops if they're chasing you, because if you run through the middle area as a killer, it cuts off the easy route for the survivor, right? So if I come in from this angle and come over here, if the killer loops around this left side of the wall over here, then I can't make it to this window safely. So whenever I come out from this window, I might just walk over here, fake it. You might want to go for a fake. That's always a valid strategy, especially against lower rank killers. But whenever you fake, you do want to pay attention to what direction the killer's moving. And you want to try and go for a bit of a, not really a 360, but just more of a juke on them. So as he comes in from this direction trying to cut me off from this window, hell, if I see him committing to that side early, I might just not even commit to the window at all. I might just come back over here, run straight back to the Blood Lodge, you know? Or if I do end up committing to the vault and I see that he's in the middle, then fuck it, straight back to the L wall over here. I can loop around the L wall. I don't have to take the window. I can come back to the T wall over and over again. You can just chain all of these loops together over several times. And like I said on the previous map, you want to be trying to use up windows in a lot of situations, but if you're going to get hit just to try and use a window, then fuck it, dude. You don't have to use up the window every time. You can drop a pallet if you need to. If I'm getting chased at this tractor and I know I'm going to get hit at the window if I try and commit to it, I'm going to just run through the pallet and drop it. Because at the end of the day, the killer has two options. They can try and keep chasing you at that pallet, or they can break it. And either of those options are good for you once the pallet is down, because either you can take the loot for a long time, or you can run away if he smacks you. Alright, so that's probably going to be it for these basic tips on looping. Just make sure you're hugging your walls, make sure you're checking behind you, but also make sure you're looking ahead. Don't run into a rock or a tree, for example. I know I do that a lot, so you just got to keep an eye out when you're playing Survivor. You got to make sure you're adjusted to how the killer plays, because at the end of the day, this isn't a game against AI. This is a game against other sentient players who will adapt if they see something is starting to go a certain way over and over again. If I run this loop the exact same way every single time, the killer's going to adjust. He's going to change how he runs it to try and cut me off. You want to make sure you're mixing it up, making sure that they have to adjust to you, not you adjusting to them. That'll be all though.